All right, so this month's Learning Lab, we're going to be going over agility grids. So who am I? For those of you that have been here before, it's good to have you again. I think based off of the attendance that a lot of you guys have been here in the past, but if you don't know me, my name's Chase Linsenbigler. I leave my camera on for introductions. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off so you can focus on the content. And what I do here at Wisys is, turned off my screen share instead of my camera. All right. What I do here at Wisys is I handle our partner enablement. So I'm a former customer facing consultant. Obviously, I spent a lot of time with the product, learn the types of issues and situations our customers face, and have brought that over to the partner side to help enable partners to be as strong with Wisys as possible. So a big goal of ours for 2023 is growing our partner program, and along with that, we're hoping to produce a lot more content for all of our prospects, customers, partners, really any user of Wisys. We want to make more content so everyone that uses our product can get as strong with the tools as possible. And probably the biggest piece of all of that new content are these learning labs. So if you've been here with us before in the past or watching the recordings, we're doing things a little bit differently now. We used to do these twice a month. We had one separate session for partners, one for customers and prospects. But now we're just going to consolidate that into one session every month for everyone. So partners, prospects, customers, you guys can all feel free to join these sessions going forward. They're going to be on the second Tuesday of each month from 2:30 to 3:30 EST. We only sent out the invite about a week in advance. So if you want to make sure you have the time slot available, you can go ahead and book that time up on your calendar. I know that calendars fill up quickly, so that's a good way to make sure you have the time available. For our partners on the call today, I offer a lot of resources to you guys as far as training is concerned. We do introduction training, in-depth training for our design tool products, which is what we're going over today. We're going to be touching on Design Studio a lot in today's session. And I also do standing team meetings for continued enablement, to help answer questions for your teams, answer specific prospect questions, process flow, talk about tailorings you're working on, all those types of things. So again, it's a goal of mine for all of our partners to get as strong with the product as possible. So if you don't have anything like that on the calendar with me yet, feel free and reach out and set something up. I'd love to work with your team just so we can continue growing our partnership stronger together. All right, so now on to the good stuff. What are we here for today? Today we're going to be going over a little overview of what agility grids are. I think a lot of you guys have seen grids, have a little bit of an experience with, what the desktop product that we offer is, but you probably don't know the full capabilities, and that's going to be the goal of today's session. So we'll talk a little bit about some out-of-the-box grids, how our desktop product works, and then we'll go into customizing a standard grid. And when we do so, we're going to take a grid that is purely informational. Basically, it just allows you to view information from your SAP system in a better manner, a dashboard style, Excel style grid. We're going to take that grid, we're going to change it into a process grid, which allows you to perform a transaction. Then we're going to add a banner to it, which is just like a nice fancy title for appearance sake. We're going to add a filter to trim down the grid. Only give what information the user actually wants to see. We're going to add a child grid to allow you to drill into certain lines and view more information. A link that will open up a document from within SAP Business One. An alert that highlights certain information in the grid. And lastly, we're going to add a button that prints a label automatically from the grid. And then we'll set that grid up and have it available to be used within Agility Explorer. So before we jump over to Agility Explorer, we're going to be taking this Inventory Pallet View. And by the end of this session, we're going to make it look like this. It's a lot more going on, and you'll understand by the end of this session, why we want to get it to this point, right? Why we're adding in these specific things and what the functionality is. So first, we're going to jump over to Agility Explorer. That's AE. That's our desktop product. This is where the users will access the grids. Any of your employees or your customers can go in here and view any of the information that we have built out for the desktop currently. So first, we're going to look at the grid that we're going to be tailoring today, which is our inventory palette view. So what the inventory palette view is, it's a purely informational grid. So once this loads in here, what we see is just a bunch of information displayed. Again, it's an Excel style format. So we have columns, we have rows. So in this case, the rows are, for the specific package lines. This is a view that allows you to see all the packages in the Wisys system. And then information is in cells, similar to how Excel would be. Information is displayed in a cell that is assigned to a row and a column. So pretty simple. If you're familiar with Excel, very, very similar flow and format to Excel. And a grid like this, all we're doing here is querying information so that the users can see it, relatively easily, right? So I can go in here if I want to see a specific item, I can search it here. So we can search an item and now we just see pallets with that item on it. Of course, you can go to a filter up here too and just see a list of items or, what have you. But easily accessible information, that's the goal of a very basic grid like this. It's all fueled by a SQL query, pulls that data from SAP Business One, displays it in an easy to use, easy to organize screen like this. Now, if we jump up to sales AR here, we'll take a look at a little bit more of an advanced out of the box grid with our sales order grid. So here with sales orders, you'll see there's a couple of additions, not nearly the amount of things that we're going to be doing in our tailoring today, but there's a few additions to this grid here. So we do have some alerts. So this alert allows you, to have a visual cue here that shows, okay, this order is overdue. You can scroll through the grid and quickly see any overdue order. Of course, I have a ton because this is a demo test environment, right? But we can quickly scroll through, see any overdue orders. We have access to SAP Business One. So this is a document link. If I click this here, it'll open up the sales order in B1. If I'm logged into B1, I'm logged up. And of course, that's only going to work for users that have access to SAP B1. That's probably obvious at this point since I had to log in, but now if I click this, it'll open up that order in SAP. And there you go, there's our sales order 976. We can quickly jump to that. We also now have a child grid below. So you see if I flip through my sales order lines, we get line information for that sales order displayed at the bottom. So it changes based on the sales order I have selected in my header grid, my main grid up here at the top. We can just flip through that and view any line information. So it's a grid within a grid, right? It allows us to drill into more information and access more. Those elements that I just, pointed to and talked about here are all going to be added to the grid that we're going to tailor today. But there's much more that you can do from within grids. We can actually make them do transactions. That could be anything from printing a document to maybe you have a grid with a bunch of items and you create a palette from the grid, right? A grid can perform any transaction Wisys can perform just on a desktop instead of a handheld. Of course, there are not as advanced of grids in the out of the box process is what we can create because it's not a one size fits all type of situation there. With grids, it's very tailoring focused right now. We are working to build even more out of the box for the out of the box product, but like I mentioned, it's not one size fits all. And a lot of the times, a grid fits a specific customer process. So typically in those cases, they are tailored. But that's why we're doing this session today. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to tailor one of those. So again, we're going to be doing this inventory palette view and we're going to make it much more advanced than what it currently is. So I'm going to close out of Agility Explorer there. And now I'm going to jump over to Design Studio, this DS here. So here from within Design Studio, first, I'm going to go take a look at the grid we're going to be making changes to, that inventory palette view grid. That's in my standard Agility Palettes project here. That's a Wisys project. With any tailoring, it is important to note, I know we talked about this with labels. If any of you have had training with me or one of our consultants on, doing tailored forms or anything like that, you've probably heard this plenty of times as well. When you're creating something tailored, we always need to make a copy and put it in its own project. There's a couple reasons for doing that. I don't want to just jump in here and make changes to the inventory palette view, because number one, if I do that and I mess something up really bad, I can't just revert back to the original, right? But if I keep the original, make a copy, I will always have that baseline to go back to if I make a mistake. I'll always have that original code there. Number two, a lot of the time when we tailor grids like this, we're typically trying to create something new functionality, right? It doesn't mean that we don't desire to have the original. So, maybe what we tailor is only good for certain employees that we want to have all that data, and you want to leave the original palette view for other employees. Of course, if we go in here and overwrite it, then we don't have the option to do that. But most importantly, if I go in here and I make changes to this palette view, and I'm using that at all my locations, it becomes very important to our process. And then I update Wisys the next day. Wisys is going to bring in the most current version of all of our standard out of the box stuff. So in that case, it would overwrite my tailorings because this would no longer be the most current version, and I would lose all that. So you want to make sure you copy it and put it in a project of its own. And we'll get into that in a minute here. But the first thing we're going to do is I am taking this grid and it's going to go from informational, like we looked at, where it was just data displayed on a screen, and it's actually going to have some functionality. So I need to change it from a regular grid to a process grid. And to do so, I'm going to start from scratch, but I'm going to take my SQL query from here. So I'm just going to drill in. And that's why I said earlier on that we use the copying or tailoring a standard grid loosely for this example today, because I'm not exactly just taking a copy and making changes to it. I have to change the actual component type of the grid so that we can perform a function. So I copy my SQL statement there. I'm going to go to open projects, and now I'm going to go to my tailored project learning lab right here. Typically, if you're doing this for a customer or for your own team, you would want to name this with the name of the company, something like that, so okay, that's where all of our tailored applications are housed. So now I'm going to go into Learning Lab here. Oh, this is slowing down on me. Just bear with me here for a second. All right, so now we're in here in our Learning Lab project, and I didn't show you before, but back at that last screen, you literally just hit New Project and give it a name, and that's all you need to do to create a project. But so I'm here in my existing Learning Lab project, and I'm going to go to New Component, and I'm going to go to Process Grid this time. So again, the original was a regular grid, just displays standard information, doesn't do any processes. We're going to switch to a process grid here. And let's call that Learning Lab Palette View. I could give it a description if I want to. That's not really necessary for now. Now I'm going to just drop in my SQL query. And one other thing I'm going to do here, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to drill into the specific lines for additional information. So if you noticed before, one line in the palette view would not only show package information, but it would show actual package line information, right? Information on the items, that sort of thing. In that case, it would create some duplicate lines, stuff like that. It's not necessarily the cleanest query for a grid of this sort. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and get rid of anything line related and just focus on the package data in the main grid. And then we'll have a child grid we'll create later with the line information. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim this down real quick and get rid of anything related to the package line table or the serial and lot table. All right. Okay, and then I can get rid of our linkage here too, because we do not need those joins anymore. And I kept bin, I kept that bin data because we'll want to see that. But now at this point, we just have bin data and standard package table stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and apply and then hit OK once applying is done. And now I'm going to preview. And what we're going to see here is it's not going to be cleaned up yet. So when we're done doing all these tailorings, you can come in here and change column names, get rid of columns you don't want to see, that type of thing. So the other grid would currently look a lot cleaner than this. But what we see now is the same query that we had before, pulling the same package data. We got rid of the lines and things like that, is now displayed. But in this case, I now have these checkboxes along the side. That's because I switched it to a process grid, and those checkboxes allow us to identify, what lines we're going to want to do a process or a transaction for. So before, I did not have the availability to do that because it was in a standard grid. That's why I made the change here to create a process grid to give me those checkboxes so that I could, do transactions for specific lines. So that's a start. Now we have our base down. We have our process grid with our query. It has the data that we want. It's not really cleaned up yet, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's go ahead and start adding some functionality. So first, when I open this up, I'm going to add a banner. A banner is the most basic thing we're going to do today. It's just in here in your settings, down here in the banner tab. All a banner simply does is give a more colorful, more noticeable title, right, for visibility's sake. But some customers, they like to have that on every single grid with their company name or something along those lines. A banner can really help something look a lot better than a plain black and gray style grid. Just add some color, add some visibility. So let's just do pallet inventory is going to be the name. And I'm not going to use default color. I'm going to put some yellow on there for Wisys and apply it. And now, it just takes a couple seconds, but now I have that nice yellow banner up there with our title. Again, just makes it a little better to look at, a little easier on the eyes, and everything being gray and this kind of blending into the menu at the top breaks things up a bit. So now we have our banner there for visibility. And we're going to just jump back into our grid. And we're going to add one more simple thing right now to our main grid, and then we'll get into some advanced stuff. So we're going to add a filter really quickly here. We're going to click on filter fields up here in the menu. And what this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to be able to assign a field that we're going to filter our grid on based on what's in my query. So if I just drop down here to shipment number, WSPKG shipment number, double click it, I'm going to assign that as a filter so that my users can go in here and say, I only want to view pallets that are on recent shipments, right? So maybe they'll say shipments 100 to 110, right? Then they can see those pallets for those 10 shipments. If they want to see only inventory pallets that are not on a shipment, they can just do 0 in both ends of the range, and it'll just show pallets that are not on a shipment. So I'm going to keep this set up as range criteria, and filter type is going to be range so that I can enter in a range of shipment numbers. I could do single value if I only wanted to view one at a time. You could go through a list and check the boxes of what you want to see, pick one from a list. There's a lot of different options, but the best for this case is going to be a range. I'm just going to apply that and hit OK. And now let's right click and preview again. All right, so now we see when we query it, nothing comes up yet because we have a filter on so that we're not bringing back the full query. We're only showing the user what they actually need to see. In most cases, the user probably doesn't want to see every single pallet that's ever existed in the system, right? They probably want to go in here and they probably want to see specific pallets for specific shipments, or maybe they want this filter to be for packages or based on the status of the package, whatever they want. In this case, we're doing a shipment range. So I'm going to do 0 here, tab, and 0 again, and hit OK. And we can see all of our packages that are not on a shipment. So these are just our inventory packages. You can see the shipment number is always 0 there. Ton in my demo environment here. I can go back to my filter by clicking the tab there, and now I can change it. Let's say we want to see those recent pallets, so let's do 80 to 100. Now I'm only going to see shipments that are within that 80 to 100 range. So pretty simple there. The filter allows us to slim down the query. Most cases you don't want to just see everything, right? So it gives us that ability to filter our query without having a, concrete where statement there in our SQL query originally, right? We add in a where statement that can change based on the input to the filter. All right. So those are the first two basic steps that I wanted to do to our main grid. But now before we get into advanced stuff, I think it's time to add our child grid so we can drill down into that package line information. So here I'm gonna go to maintenance again, and I'm gonna add another new component. But in this case, we're not gonna have any actions happening on the child grid. So it does not need to be a process grid. It is simply going to be a regular grid, just like the above palette view was originally, right? So it's going to just display information here. I'm just going to call this package line. Hit OK there. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to get too crazy with my query here either. I'm just going to do select star from WSPKG line. And in this case, it's going to give me all of the package line information for the highlighted package. Now, I could bring in SL information to see serial lot info. Again, I'm trying to keep this pretty simple for today's session, so we're not going to worry about that, but that would just be a simple, join, bring in that table. I mostly don't want to do it since I'm just doing select star. I don't want to have, a ridiculous amount of fields displayed. So now we have that query there. Let's go ahead and preview and see what that child grid looks like right now. We can see here it has all of that line data, right? All the package line data, everything that's in our package line tables is displayed in here. A lot of this stuff you would get rid of. Like I said, we'll talk about this more later when we go through cleanup, but it's as simple as clicking on this and hiding the column, or you can select column chooser here and drag and drop the things that you do or don't want, right? So I could get rid of item description, bring it back on, whatever you want to do, but we'll talk about that more later. So now I have my child grid querying, pulling all of the package line information. But that said, I need to do two things here. I need to get it set up to work from within our main grid, right? So it still doesn't function in our main grid. If we preview our main grid, it still looks the way it did. There is no child grid, no additional information down there, no drilling into information, right? So I need to get it set up to work from within there. And I also need to set up the logic so that this grid filters, like the filter we added before for shipment numbers. We need to set it up so that this grid filters dependent on the line that's selected in the grid above it. So first, we're going to go into our package line grid, our child grid. And we're going to go to filter fields. And in this case, we just act like we're creating a regular filter. So we'll go down to package line and find our item number, or not our item number, our package ID. Yeah, we need the package IDs because we want to see the line information for the selected package. So I have package ID here. Now in this case, we're going to change our filter type to be single value because we only want one value to feed it, and that's going to be the line that we selected above. Apply and hit OK. So now the filter is in place. It's ready to be utilized by the main grid. Now we need to go do the linkage to bring that into the main grid here. So I'm going to double click and open back up my Learning Lab palette view here. And from within here, I'm going to go over to my detail link. And I'm going to go find my component. So I can hit this little lookup here for component name. And we'll go find package line. There it is in the right project Learning Lab. That looks right. That's the grid we want. Double click on that. And now we're going to click this lookup here for linked columns. And we're going to give it the logic to feed that filter. So we set up that filter before. It knows that original grid is looking for package line to tell it what to filter on. So now I need to tell it what I'm using in this grid to, line up to that package line filter. So, or that package ID filter. So here, I'm going to grab the package ID from my current grid. I'm going to have it match up to the original package ID. Now we have that linkage there. And lastly, I'm just going to give it a title here. So we'll say line information. All right. Now if I go ahead and preview, we will see our child grid added here to our grid. So you can see it's down here. I need to pull it up so it's actually on the screen. Now we have this child grid displaying line information, so we can see the first line highlighted here. The first package highlighted has 2 lines. If we go down through, there's another 2 lines on that package. Most of those had 2. Here's one with 3. There's one with 1. We can just go through and expand that line information for every package in our grid now. So now we're getting pretty deep as far as information is concerned, right? We have a wealth of information at our fingertips. We want to slim this down eventually. We don't want to do information overload and leave all these fields exposed, just blowing up the user's screen, right? But we have a lot of information here. We have the ability to drill into the information above. If you don't care about this, you can pull it down and essentially hide it and focus on the information up here. That depends on user preference, but we have that ability to drill down in there and get deeper info. So for the sake of information, we want to start highlighting specific things that are of importance in this grid. And then we also want to expand on our ability to talk back and forth with SAP from within the grid. So first, we're going to expand on information by adding an alert. An alert's going to give us the ability to highlight specific things. We can create rules in here and logic to highlight things from within the grid. Very similar to conditional formatting. The only thing is, in this case, when you use an alert, it's built into the query. So it will always happen that way. No matter who's using the grid, no matter how they have it set up for their specific user, the grid will always function that way and highlight those specific columns. But very similar to something like Excel, we do offer conditional formatting, so you could set alerts from actually within your view in the grid. So if I wanted an alert on my grid to show me, any package that is tied to a specific sales order, I can set up a conditional formatting to alert me on that. Maybe any package that's tied to a specific vendor, something like that. And if Aaron wants to set up conditional formatting on his grid to see, any package that's shipped in the system, if he only really cares about scrolling through and seeing the different information for ship packages, he could do that. And our 2 roles would never interfere with each other. I would never see what he has set up. He would never see what I have set up. That's conditional formatting. But here, an alert, this will be the same for every single customer. So in this case, let's say our firm cares a lot about overdue packages. We want to make it clear to anybody who's in here accessing this information what packages we would consider overdue. We want them to see a package in there and realize, okay, that needs to be shipped out or something needs to be done with that. It's been hanging around for too long, right? So I'm going to go to my alert column and I'm going to alert on my date here. Actually, I think I made a mistake. I'm in my main grid. We need to do this on the child grid. Our alert is going to be set up on our child grid because that's where the package date information is. So now we're going to go back into alerts here. And we need to see our created date right here. And before we do our operand, we're going to go ahead and enter in the value because this is a little bit tricky here. So we're going to look at pallets that are over 2 months old, right? Anything that's been in the warehouse for longer than 2 months, we're going to consider that an old pallet. We want to make sure to note that on the grid so that information jumps out to the user. They can see, okay, here's an old pallet. We need to get that out. We need to add that to a shipment. We need to do something with it. It's been hanging around too long. So to do that, I go ahead and I find my date variable here, today's date plus or minus, right? And I'm going to do minus 60 days. So today's date minus 60 days means pallets that are 60 days old, right? Or less, right? Okay. So today, add minus 60. So because of that, if I went and put greater, I'm looking at pallets that are higher than 60. So that would be like negative 59, negative 58. That's a higher number than negative 60. So it would actually be wrong here in my query. It would highlight all of my new pallets as old pallets. So I actually need this to be less than in this case, pallets that are less than negative 60. So a pallet that's 70 days old would be negative 70. And then, of course, that would fit the logic here and it would be highlighted as an old pallet. Now we're going to give it a description for old pallet. Color, we could change that to whatever we want. I'm just going to keep it as red here. I think that's perfect. And then we pick a column to display that on. You know, I could get creative with this. I could put that on the package number so that just when you look at the package number, it displays as red. But for the sake of today, I'm just going to put it on the date so we know exactly what we're talking about. Apply and hit OK. And now, if we go ahead and preview our view, since I'm in this test database, which has a lot of old data, I think we're going to see a ton of old pallets in here. So let me go ahead and pull that out. Actually, let's make this full screen. So yeah, right out the gate, right? These two pallets are old pallets. Now, if I change my query to see my most recent shipments, so let's say maybe like, not sure how many shipments I really have in here, but oh, that's not even new enough. Here, we'll go to 500. Make sure no matter what, I have my most current data because I know I have some pallets in here that wouldn't fall into that rule. Scroll all the way up to the top. Here's our most recent package. And now we can see here, there's nothing highlighted, right? It's not an old pallet. This is not an old pallet. Now, if I scroll down, here we got some old ones. So you see the way the alert works there. It's built into the grid. No matter what I do, it is always going to show up as an alert. But I do have the ability to do that conditional formatting like I referenced. So let's say on this above grid, I want to do conditional formatting for you know, any package that's not in O5D. I could do this, right? I could go highlight cells, you know, equal to O5D, you know, and I could set it up for those to be red, whatever I want. That would be in the specific view. So I could do that. I could save this as Chase's layout. And then anytime I use it, I have that conditional formatting, but no one else does. So there's layers to that, but an alert will always show for every user. All right. Now, expanding on information more, let's go ahead and add that linkage to SAP Business One. So we're going to go back into our package line here again, because that's where the item information is as well. And we're actually going to go to buttons. Even though we're not creating a formal button, there will be a hyperlink placed on that item data. So, you know, it will function as a button would. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to hyperlink and hit my add symbol. And then this is going to be a transaction/report. And the name, let's just call it item. All right. So now there's a lot of other settings. We will talk about some of these other settings when we make our print button later. But for now, nothing else here is too important to do. So we're just going to go ahead and define our transaction. So we go down to transaction definition, hit define, and this is where we'll tell the button what type of transaction it's performing. We're going to want to go to current record. That means, you know, we perform this transaction on the actual record we selected. So we will open a document in SAP for the item we selected, no other items, right? So current record, add transaction. And in here, the transaction to open up a document in SAP is called B1 launch form. So I'm going to go ahead and select that there. And now we just need to set up the parameters here so that it gets the right information that it needs. So first, we're going to go to Form ID. Form ID is always going to be defaulted based off of the Form ID of the document for SAP Business One. Of course, if you're tailoring this yourself and you don't have that information accessible to you, you could reach out to your Wisys consultant or your partner, and they can provide the necessary information to help you get where you need to go. But for this, an item is going to be number 4. That's our form ID there. Then we're going to go to our object key. Our value source is going to be view. What that means is I'm going to look at the actual grid and I'm going to pull information that is in that grid to feed the transaction, right? So I'm going to do view and I'm going to do item number because we're trying to open up an item in SAP Business One. So we need that item number to feed into it so that we know what we're trying to open. So view an item number tells us what to open. Form ID tells us what type of document to open in SAP. And then lastly, we want to set a return error. In this case, if anything goes wrong with our transaction, we want to have an error message that actually explains what had happened whenever it errors out. So I'm going to set my return value here with just an error message, and that'll give us the system's error message to tell us, what went wrong in the process. I'm going to save that. Everything looks good here. There's nothing else I'm really concerned about changing right now, but I do want to go and make sure to link that hyperlink onto my field. So now I need to go to item number in here, if I can find it. Did I miss it? Oh, there it is, right at the top. Item number, gonna uncheck visible there. And now I'm ready to go. When we simulate now, what we're gonna see is we're going to see item number have that linkage and be able to open up that document in SAP. And again, I'm making those changes in the child grid, but since the child grid is linked to our main grid, every time we go in and preview, we just preview the full main grid, and we can access those changes immediately. All right, so now you see there's a hyperlink there. If I go to one with a couple of rows, it'll look a little bit clearer here. Let me see. Our highlighted row shows the hyperlink is a darker color. All right, you know what? I need to get an older palette in here. So I'm going to go back to my query of 80 to 100 because I know I had a couple in there with multiple items. I create a lot of data, which is packages with just one line on it, which of course is not going to be symbolic of what you guys are probably doing in your warehouses. So here we go. Here's a package with 3 lines. You see the hyperlink. So the highlighted line, the hyperlink gets a little bit darker. That's why I wanted to do this, to pull attention to it. It has that blue, just like a hyperlink in an email address, something like that. It's very clear, right? There's linkage here. So when I click this, it'll open up that item FD004 in SAP Business One. Can jump back there. Let's just click on another item here. There we go. And it's going to open up the item master, but let's say we have the case of an item that we manufacture, then it will bring up the bill of materials there so we can see what actually goes into that item so that we can, be aware of what all is on that pallet, right? This might be a manufactured item. No, it's not. I'm not going to spend the time looking for one right now, but bill of materials, if it's an item that you manufacture, it'll open the bill of materials. If it's an actual, regular inventory item that you purchase, something like that, it'll just open up the item master in SAP. All right, so now we added that linkage here to SAP. We highlighted some information. Of course, earlier we got our filter, our banner. We also have our child grid that we added. So the last piece here, and the reason we went with a process grid in the first place, is we want to add a button that prints a pallet label for our selected line. So let's go ahead and close out of our preview. And now I'm going to open up my main grid. So this time I'm putting the button on my main grid, not on the child grid. So I'm just going to double click on the main one here. I'm going to go to buttons, and we're creating a real button in this case. We're not doing a hyperlink. So this is kind of user preference, right? You could put it on the toolbar, which has it at the top of the screen. You can put it on the link bar, which has it at the bottom. You can even put it on the ribbon. I like it at the bottom. It makes the most sense, in my opinion, with process flow, right? We go through the list, we check the boxes for everything we want to print a label for. And then at the bottom of the screen, after we check those boxes, we just press our print button there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit my plus symbol. And it is once again going to be a transaction/report. And our caption, it could be label, it could be print, whatever you want. I'm just going to do print here. And now, once again, we will come back and do a couple of things in the settings down here in our transaction. But first, let's go ahead and define that transaction. All right. So here we're going to go to detail. Detail tells us that we want to perform that transaction on the specific line. I'm going to right click. And this time, instead of going to add transaction, I'm going to go to add document type print. So document type print tells us that we're going to be printing from the Wisys document manager. If you're not familiar with document manager, what we have in there is we have several different folders for different types of modules, right? So like in our inventory folder, for example, from within it, then we have other folders where you set up specific labels. So that's where we would set up a standard carton label, a standard pallet label, a pick list, and what have you. So in this case, we're printing information for pallets. So we're going to just print out a standard pallet label. So we're going to tell our grid that we want to look at document manager and print the label for whatever is in inventory standard pallets in document manager. Hit save. And just as we did before, once again, we have to set up parameters. The only parameter that we need in this case is something to tell it what package number we're printing for. So we're going to go to view, and we're just going to look at, for the checked rows that we're printing, we're going to look at that package number that they have in the actual grid. Now I'm going to hit save here. And before we move forward here with the button, we're going to add a pre and post transaction message too. So in this case, for today's lab, I'm not too concerned about showing you an actual printed label. We just want to know that it worked. So we're not going to go too much into the details of the document. I'm not even entirely sure what document I have set up in my pallet labels. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a pre-transaction message so we can see that it's firing the print, right? We're going to do something like, do you want to print labels? And then we're going to check the box here for yes, no. That gives the user the ability to say, yes, I do, no, I don't. So if they hit the button by accident, they get a chance to back out here. That's much more important, of course, in cases where we have a transaction that actually creates something like creating a pallet or a carton in Wisys, right? We want to ask them, are you sure you want to do this? So we're asking them that. We're going to say yes or no. And then afterward, we're just going to give a successful message. We'll just do labels printed. And then they'll just hit OK to continue proceeding. Of course, there's no need to say yes or no here. And if it errors out, it'll pass in a error message like how we discussed earlier. That's just going to be an error message from the system. It's going to tell us what went wrong. All right. So nothing else in here is really important to mess with right now. Of course, I wanted to utilize the checked rows, but we could have it just do the row that we have highlighted, right? Which would just mean one label at a time. Instead, I want to be able to check 50 rows if I want and print out all those labels. So we're going to leave it at checked rows. We can do some other things in here too. We have the ability to refresh the grid or not refresh the grid. We can remove the rows that we print the label for, but I don't want to do that. We could have it close after we perform the transaction. It could just close the grid. All of those are things that might come in handy, right, when you tailor other grids and other applications. But for today's purposes, none of that is necessary. So I'm going to hit OK. And now we're going to go ahead and take a look. So let's preview our palette view here. So now we see we have this print button here. Once I check a box, it'll be enabled and I can go ahead and print that label. So let's just go ahead and select it. Do you want to print labels? That's the message we set up earlier. Yes, I do. Now in Document Manager, I have a prompt set up. So it actually asks me how many copies I want to print. In this case, let's just say we want to print 1 copy. Hit OK. Now it's printing to a PDF, so that's just going to be saved somewhere in my files. Not too concerned with showing you that for the sake of what we're doing today. But now we get our successful message that the labels are printed. We can hit OK, and we can go about our business. Now, of course, we have refresh set up here. Nothing changed, but it refreshed the grid after we perform the transaction. If we set up some of those things like removing a row, that row would have jumped off the grid once we did our transaction. We could have set our grid up to close so that as soon as we performed our transaction, it automatically closed as well. But now we've gone through, we've done all the tailoring aspects to our grid here. So everything that is tailoring related, actually going into Design Studio and performing, it's done, right? The grid is ready. The grid is designed in Design Studio. It's ready to go. There is some cleanup involved. We can do that from within Agility Explorer. So let's go ahead and set it up to be on the actual Agility Explorer menu. So from in here, this is very simple. I'm going to go to the menu I want it in. So of course, this is palette related. Let's put it in inventory. Then I'm going to go ahead down to agility so that I know it's part of the Wisys product. And I'm just going to drag it and drop it in here. Let's put it right above our original inventory palette view. There we go. So now our Learning Lab palette view is added to the menu. We can leave this open, but I'm going to go to my desktop and open up Agility Explorer so that we can actually go ahead and view it in Agility Explorer now. So you notice, obviously, this wasn't even created before, but at the start of this session, that Learning Lab Inventory Palette View was not there in inventory, right? You couldn't access it from within here, but now I'll have it available. I accidentally opened up 2 sets of Agility Explorer here. Gonna slow myself down. Once this loads up. So what we're gonna see here is in my menu, I can just go to the exact spot where I put it in the directory in Design Studio here. So I'll just go down to inventory and then I will scroll and find my Learning Lab palette view. There it is. So we can see our original. So our original, once again, is just very basic, very plain here. Then we can open up our Learning Lab palette view. And here, we have our banner, we have our button, our filter, and everything looks perfect just the way we wanted it. Now, it's important to highlight here that while in Design Studio, you assign it to a menu, I'm an administrator, so I automatically get access to that. Administrators get access to anything on the desktop product, right? But if you want this to be used by your users, now it's available to you, it's available to the administrator, but the user still can't see it. You will still have to go to their roles and go ahead and assign this grid to users, through their role in the Wisys setup, right? So don't forget that in security for Wisys, you will have to set up your new grid in the role, but now it's effectively available and any administrator will have access to it. And again, like I mentioned before, there would still be some cleanup here. So I would go through, I would change field names. So again, like I would right click on that. I would go ahead and change the text for the field name to warehouse, because right now it just shows, classic SQL query text. I would clean that up so that it looks better for my users. I would right click and go to my column chooser and drag and drop and get rid of any columns that I don't care about here. I would do some cleanup to get this to the point where I think it's presentable to the customer, to the actual employees to use. But for the sake of today, we're not going to spend a lot of time on doing that. I did it in my own time. So we can jump back here and take a look at the screenshot. This is what it looks like cleaned up. Obviously, I did a lot with the column chooser. There is an extensive amount of fields in here because we just did select star and pulled in the whole package line table. So here I got rid of a bunch of fields in our child grid, got rid of a few up here as well. And then I changed the naming for everything so that it's very readable. It flows nicely. It's easy to see. And now we have our tailored grid, right? We took that classic inventory palette view and we really expanded it and added a lot more functionality there. So just to go back over what we covered today, we did a brief overview of agility grids. We talked about what's available to do, what's in the standard product, and the fact that we plan to be adding, more and more advanced stuff to the standard product as time goes on. But right now, advanced grids are typically tailored. Then we went from there and we tailored, in air quotes, we tailored our inventory palette view. I put that in air quotes because we actually created a totally different product utilizing that SQL query, right? So we took that SQL query from the original and we put that into a process grid this time because before it was a standard grid, it was only for visualization. Now it's in a process grid so we can actually perform transactions with it. We added a banner for visibility. We added a filter to slim down our query. We added a child grid to allow us to drill into additional information on each package. Added a link to SAP to open up the item master in SAP for the item we're looking at. Added an alert to show us all the old pallets in the system. And then we added that button there to allow us to print a pallet label for any selected lines. And after we did all that, we set it up and have it working from Agility Explorer, ready to be used by any administrator and ready to be assigned to any role for any user. So that's all we had for you today. I know that was a lot to squeeze in here in an hour, but we got through it. Now, I want to highlight, though, those are very good features to have. Those are advanced features, but grids go much, much deeper than this, right? So I'd be curious to hear your guys' feedback. If you want to know even more about what grids can do, about the different transactions and how advanced they can get, we could do another learning lab on this. It's like a Agility Grids 2, like a second level course. This is kind of your introduction to what is there and what's available to tailor a grid. But obviously that took us an hour, so it would take a lot more time to get more advanced. But these go even significantly deeper than what I showed you today. But today is everything you need to get a pretty advanced, nice looking grid in there and get some actual functionality going on instead of just being able to view data from SAP. So if you need additional enablement, feel free to contact me. Any partners, reach out to me directly. We'll get something set up. Customers, if you don't have a consultant or you have a just brief Wisys question, anything like that, reach out to me and I'll get you pointed in the right direction or get you the answers I can. Aaron, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, so one of the questions was basically, will this work in HANA as well as SQL?
Yeah, it works for both SQL and HANA. It's just our basic out of the box product. Now with HANA, we actually got into querying and stuff like that a little bit today, just like normal, right?
Yep.
HANA has a little bit of a different language than SQL, so you just got to be aware of that going into it. But that's the difference.
Yeah, that's great. Obviously most of us understand, but some people don't have that idea if it's available. Also, things like UDFs, UDTs, maybe some third-party applications. Is that information available to be queried into a grid or form or a grid that you showed today?
Yeah, and that's a great question. If it's in SAP, if it's in your SQL database, we can access that. So, we're just querying against SQL just like you would in SQL Management Studio, or if you're on HANA Management Studio, we're just running a query that pulls that information to the grid. So any table that is there, it's willing to be accessed. We can pull that information for you. Any field too, UDFs too.
Yeah. And I believe most of the questions are based on specific queries and that we can answer offline. So, it appears that people want to do more and see more. So You've done a very good learning lab this month, Chase. I think you've piqued a lot of interest.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and like I mentioned too, guys, anybody who's interested in learning the even more advanced stuff here, I'd love to get that feedback. That helps me develop what our learning labs are going to look like going forward. And if that's of high demand, then I will make sure we get a Agility Grids level 2 course in there, so we can get even more advanced with this stuff. All right. Well, thanks for attending, everyone. Aaron, thank you for moderating, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll see you guys next month.